Hey there, amazing friends. I warmly invite you to join me on this exciting journey by subscribing to my channel, liking, commenting, and sharing my videos. Every like, comment, and share brings us closer together and fuels my passion to create more great content. Your support truly makes all the difference. Thank you for being the heart of this community. The Red Killer. The serial killer who wrote Soviet Russia's dark history in blood. They called him the Red Killer. In the sprawling confusions of Soviet Russia, a realm of quiet fear and whispered judgments, his name was little more than a rumor, barely spoken above a hushed breath. Rumors swirled of a man who stalked the night, leaving a trail of victims whose fates would vanish into the thick bureaucracy of the state. He was said to be cunning and patient, slipping through the cracks of an oppressive system that prided itself on total control. Between hidden archives and trembling testimonies, the Red Killer crafted his own dreadful legacy, one that spoke of blood, secrecy, and the unspoken terrors haunting the Soviet Union. It all began with a handful of missing persons in the late 1960s, primarily in remote regions. Fishermen found an abandoned coat near a riverbank, or a caretaker discovered a battered suitcase filled with personal belongings in a derelict train station. Each instance suggested a victim who had vanished into thin air. The state newspapers rarely acknowledged such disappearances, labeling them isolated incidents or attributing them to misplaced citizens. Yet, behind closed doors, families wept and investigators quietly struggled, powerless against a labyrinth of denials. By the early 1970s, certain city officials in Leningrad and Moscow took note of a disturbing pattern. The victims shared no obvious link in terms of age or occupation. A factory worker from the outskirts, a railway clerk, an aging war hero, even a rising Komsomol member. Some were found dead, though official reports labeled them simply as unfortunate accidents. Others simply ceased to exist in the official register. Yet consistent whispers began to attribute these vanishings or unexplained deaths to a single monstrous figure, someone whom the locals, forced to rely on rumor over fact, christened with the ominous epithet, the Red Killer. Rumor had it he left cryptic messages scrawled in red ink near the scenes, lines from revolutionary songs, or references to the state's propaganda phrases, twisted and mocking. The color red, long symbolic of Soviet power, became the color of dread. In basements of police stations, a few brave inspectors suspected they had a serial murderer at large, but they lacked the political freedom to investigate thoroughly. So investigations were half measures, overshadowed by a government loath to admit that any monster could flourish under its watch. One man refused to let it lie. Captain Yuri Koval, a mid-level investigator in Leningrad's militia, quietly gathered data on unsolved murders or vanishings. With care, he compiled a folder of clippings, testimonies, and hush-hush statements. He noticed repeated references to odd circumstances, bodies found with severe beatings, the presence of a single red scrap of cloth clutched in a victim's hand, or a note pinned to a coat reading, "Unfit for the new society." These scattered clues pointed to a killer who used Soviet rhetoric as a twisted calling card. Captain Koval risked his own career by pressing deeper, knowing well that formal inquiries into something as lurid as a serial killer might end with him reprimanded or reassigned. He traveled to small towns on feigned official errands, coaxing local station clerks or watchmen into confessions. The stories were eerily similar. A stranger drifting into town, carrying an unremarkable bag. He posed as a traveling union official or a trade inspector from the center. He charmed or intimidated potential victims, then vanished without a trace. Some described him as of medium height, others insisted he was tall. Eye color uncertain. Only one detail repeated, a voice low and calm, with a formal cadence, as if he recited lines from official communiques. By 1974, Koval had found enough circumstantial evidence to believe that at least 24 murders across the USSR might be the Red Killer's handiwork. The hush was deafening. He confided in an old friend, Major Elena Voskresenskaya, who served in a quiet corner of the KGB. Initially skeptical, she gradually saw patterns in certain hidden records. Civilian files flagged as disappearances, overshadowed by unpatriotic conduct investigations, or lost in bureaucratic sprawl. Some corpses labeled as criminal scuffles or accidents had the same violent signature. Each victim's final hours were blank in official reports, glaring omissions that Voskresenskaya recognized as signifying something far more sinister. Elena quietly joined Koval's quest to unearth the truth, though she felt the oppressive weight of the system. They compiled a secret file code named Project Crimson. Page by page, they gathered witness sketches, uncoordinated forensics, and frantic letters from distant relatives. The fragments painted a portrait of a methodical predator who used the cloak of Soviet identity, fake passes, official-sounding instructions, so no one dared question him. If a low-level policeman tried, high-level superiors might hush it up to avoid embarrassment. Fear and pride thus enabled the Red Killer to operate unhindered. The rumor was he struck in the dead of night, luring unsuspecting individuals to isolated spots, sometimes promising them a chance for better rations or discreet help with a personal problem. He'd glean a victim's vulnerabilities by playing the role of a benevolent comrade. Then, once they were alone, he'd strike, often strangling or bludgeoning them, occasionally leaving a slip of blood-soaked paper with an ominous phrase, "We must purge the weak." As the body count grew, Soviet authorities occasionally apprehended scapegoats, condemning them on flimsy evidence. The real murderer remained free. Captain Koval realized the direct approach was hopeless. So he and Elena orchestrated a trap using a false identity for Koval. He would pose as a lonely traveling clerk prone to gossip about knowing secret weaknesses of the party. If the Red Killer was drawn to victims with certain vulnerabilities or known disloyalties, perhaps Koval's disguise would be too tempting to pass up. In 1977, Koval began traveling by night trains, frequenting cheap guest houses. He'd drop hints to station employees that he was in trouble, an ideal target for any manipulator. Days turned into weeks. The nation's harsh winter battered the countryside. The Red Killer seemed elusive. Only fleeting rumors. A railway worker disappeared in Siberia. A teacher found dead in a forest near Minsk. The trail was always a step ahead. One cold February night, as Koval dozed in a third-class train compartment heading for Novgorod, a man stepped in. Medium build, wearing a worn suit, carrying a battered briefcase. He introduced himself as Comrade Malinov, a traveling trade official. Koval's pulse quickened. Something about the man's calm, formal tone unsettled him. The conversation started politely enough. Malinov asked if Koval traveled often, what he did for a living. Koval stuck to his story. He was a petty clerk who disliked the local officials, had some issues with discipline. Malinov's eyes gleamed. They parted ways at the station, but to Koval's satisfaction, Malinov reappeared at the local inn where Koval was staying. Over a meager dinner, Malinov offered assistance, dropping hints that he had connections and could help Koval fix his problems discreetly. Koval feigned desperation, hoping to lead the stranger into an attempted murder scene that Elena's KGB watchers would intercept. But something felt off. Malinov was cagey, never letting slip any personal detail. Late that night, as Koval lay in bed, he heard footsteps in the corridor. He readied his hidden pistol. At precisely 2 a.m., the doorknob turned quietly. Koval's heart hammered. The door swung open, revealing Malinov's silhouette. Koval sprang up, gun in hand, expecting the watchers to close in. But no one came. Malinov froze, then retreated into the hallway with a fluid grace. Koval hesitated to shoot, unwilling to compromise Elena's plan. By the time he rushed out, the corridor was empty. Downstairs, staff insisted no one had left. Malinov had vanished. The watchers assigned outside had seen nothing. It was as if the Red Killer had guessed the trap. This near encounter stirred panic among the circle of investigators. If Malinov truly was the Red Killer, had caught the scent of betrayal, he might disappear again, only to resurface with more cunning. Meanwhile, frightened whispers of new slayings circulated. A local black market smuggler turned up dead, throat slashed in the outskirts of Stalingrad. A mid-level bureaucrat's son found murdered near a rural train crossing. Each time, rumor pinned it on the Red Killer. The press remained silent. No serial murders in the workers' paradise, one official insisted. Elena tried to rally a bigger net. She quietly enlisted a handful of KGB colleagues who recognized the danger of letting a monstrous killer roam. They formed a covert unit, but official resources were limited. Any major operation demanded party approval, which they could not risk. Instead, they surveilled train routes, distributing sketches gleaned from Koval's brief glimpse. They questioned petty criminals, trying to confirm an alias or pattern. Yet Malinov, if that was even his real name, had countless ways to slip through cracks. One stifling day in June 1979, a break came unexpectedly. A retired soldier named Volkov approached Elena with a bizarre story. Had survived an attack near a remote bus stop. The assailant posed as a traveling official, offering to share a ride. Once alone, he tried to choke Volkov, muttering phrases about weakness infecting the motherland. Volkov fought back. The attacker fled, leaving behind a small card scribbled with lines from some official decree. The card's text had a unique watermark used for certain internal state memos. This clue, combined with Volkov's description, matched the man Koval encountered. Elena realized they might trace that specific batch of memo paper if they infiltrated certain restricted offices. She spent weeks combing archives of printing logs, forging signatures to move from one department to the next. At last, she found a single local party printing facility from the Leningrad region that produced those watermarked sheets. Possibly the killer had or once had ties there. She cross-referenced employee rosters with any pattern of travel. The name Mikhail Sergeyevich Malinov appeared in older personnel files from 1965 to 1968, marked terminated. Reason: undisclosed. Subsequent lines were blacked out with bureaucratic seal. Yet the partial notes revealed had come under suspicion for improper conduct and extreme ideological statements. The file ended abruptly, with no further mention. This was enough for Elena and Koval to suspect Malinov had harbored dark fantasies about purifying society, eventually mutating into murder. They rushed to track any clue about Malinov's address or known relatives. Many dead ends. Their time was short. Each passing month risked further killings. Secretly, they posted watchers near the old printing facility and at certain seedy hostels around the region. The watchers posed as ordinary travelers, scanning crowds for a man of Malinov's description. Frustrating weeks slipped by. Then, in late 1979, a frantic call came from a small police outpost near Lake Ladoga. A series of savage murders had struck a remote hamlet. The victims each had a slip of red cloth pinned to them, scrawled with propaganda lines. Panicked villagers described a stranger who arrived by bus, wearing a worn suit, calling himself a minor official. Elena mobilized the watchers, while Koval raced there, brimming with grim determination. In that fog-shrouded hamlet, they found 3 dead: a local teacher, an elderly woman, and a teenage boy. The scrawled notes reeked of twisted ideology. The unworthy must be cleansed. The watchers spread out, scanning the roads. Finally, one comrade glimpsed a man matching Malinov's description skulking near the bus station at dawn. They converged, Koval in the lead. Malinov spotted them, fled across a deserted field. Koval gave chase, adrenaline hammering. Elena and two watchers cut him off near an abandoned barn. The confrontation was brief, but savage. Malinov, cornered, brandished a small pistol. Shots rang out in the early morning gloom. One watcher fell, wounded. Koval dove behind a fence, returning fire. Elena flanked from the side. Shots cracked the silent air. At last, Malinov was hit in the arm. He dropped to one knee. Captured at gunpoint, the man glared, eyes blazing with hatred. He spat words about purifying Soviet soil and roared that they were fools obeying spineless authorities. Koval wrested the gun away, trembling with shock that they'd finally subdued the phantom who had haunted so many nights. Malinov offered no remorse, only twisted pride, demanding the final victory for the Red Cause. The watchers bundled him into a black car, driving under heavy guard to a secret location. There was no official trial in the public sphere. The state could not publicize that a monstrous serial killer had roamed freely under Soviet governance. Instead, behind sealed doors, Koval and Elena interrogated Malinov for days. He described with chilling calm how he selected victims he deemed weak links, how he scrawled Soviet phrases to ironically justify his sadism. He boasted of outsmarting incompetent bureaucrats and reeling from the power he felt with each kill. Through clenched teeth, Koval demanded details of each murder, each disappearance. Malinov recited them as if from memory, naming times and places. The scale was more horrific than they'd feared, over 40 murders confirmed. Possibly more, since he refused to clarify certain suspicious vanishings. Elena's stomach churned at the graphic confessions, while Koval's anguish soared. This was a tide of blood hidden beneath the state's proud facade. Officially, the Red Killer did not exist. For the sake of preserving illusions, the top brass orchestrated a quiet disposal. Malinov was whisked away to a high-security facility, tried in a closed tribunal for treasonous acts and multiple homicides. Documentation was locked in classified archives. Rumor has it he was executed in late 1979, buried in an unmarked grave. No official obituary, no line in the newspapers. In the aftermath, Koval and Elena parted ways. She was reassigned to an administrative desk job, her knowledge of Project Crimson sealed away. Koval, disillusioned, eventually left the militia. He recognized that the hush forced upon them denied any closure for the families, any public acknowledgement that a serial killer had once lurked, using the state's own rhetoric as a lethal mask. A handful of investigators who aided them had no illusions that justice had truly been served. Malinov's crimes would remain hidden in the shadows of Soviet history. In time, the Soviet Union collapsed, its archives opening slightly to the scrutiny of new generations. Odd references to unexplained murders and Crimson Case surfaced in obscure corners of investigative journalism. Some came upon fragments of confessions, half-redacted, fueling speculation that a monstrous figure had once roamed behind the Iron Curtain, scrawling twisted slogans in the blood of his victims. Scholars debate whether Malinov was a single individual or a convenient scapegoat. The truth is lost amid the swirl of state secrets. Yet for those who lived through that terror, there is no doubt the Red Killer was real. Families recall how uncles, sisters, or children vanished in the hush of night. Survivors speak of nightmares featuring the color red, of a calm voice luring them to a final moment. To this day, they whisper of a killer who personified the darkest corners of a regime built on fear, weaving murder and propaganda in a single horrifying tapestry. It is said that if you stand in certain abandoned train stations after midnight, you might sense the echoes of footsteps, the ghost of a cunning predator who once slipped between official lines and ideological slogans to enact his lethal purge. And though his story remains largely erased from public records, one cannot deny the lingering weight of that hush, the unspoken truth that behind the grand illusions, the Red Killer wrote part of Soviet Russia's dark history in blood, a testament to how even the most controlling states can fail to contain the monstrous impulses that lurk within their own shadows.